I'm Nima Rajan. General Wayne Eyre has been appointed as Canada's next Chief of the Defence Staff. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced the move today in a press release. General Eyre had served as acting commander of the Canadian Armed Forces since February after taking over from Admiral Art MacDonald. Admiral MacDonald stepped down due to a military police investigation into his conduct, but no charges were laid. The Green Party of Canada has named a new interim leader. Dr. Amita Kuttner, a non-binary astrophysicist, was appointed to the job yesterday by the Greens National Council. Dr. Kuttner runs the Moonlight Institute, a nonprofit that explores ways to adapt to the climate crisis. Their mother was killed and their father severely injured in a 2005 mudslide that crushed their North Vancouver home. In 2019, they ran as a candidate in BC's Burnaby South Seymour riding. Environment Canada has issued rainfall warnings and special weather statements for parts of BC that are still submerged by floodwaters. The rain will be heaviest today and is expected to ease tonight, with northern sections of Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley in store for up to 80 millimeters of rain by tomorrow morning. Forecasters say this storm is less intense than the one almost 2 weeks ago, but they warn all the rain could cause localized flooding and cause flash floods and water pooling on the roads. All right, well, meanwhile, a massive rainstorm has forced the closure of about 30 roads and bridges in Nova Scotia, and it cut off the main highways to Port aux Basques in southwestern Newfoundland. Crews are also out assessing the damage and starting major rebuilding projects. Most of the damage was reported in Antigonish County in northeastern Nova Scotia and in Victoria and Inverness counties in northern Cape Breton, where some communities were inundated by more than 200 millimeters of rain. The Canadian military has temporarily stopped its water treatment operations in Iqaluit after high winds knocked down one of its tents. The tent, covering holding tanks filled with purified water from a nearby river, was knocked down on Monday night. Iqaluit residents haven't been able to consume their tap water for more than 40 days after it was found to contain fuel. The federal government sent the military to Iqaluit in October to help with the water emergency. Well, schools are closed and a work-from-home order is in effect as officials in Northern Ontario's Constance Lake First Nation search 11 sites for the source of a dangerous fungus. Chief Ramona Sutherland says the fungus has been linked to dozens of possible cases of blastomycosis, which is a lung infection. 13 people have probable cases and 37 other possible cases are being investigated. Ontario is ramping up its pediatric vaccination drive against COVID-19 today. The booking portal for kids aged 5 to 11 opened today, or rather on Tuesday, and the vaccination clinics will begin filling up with young patients this morning. The provincial government has said vaccinating kids in this age group will represent a turning point in the pandemic. The Quebec government is on the defensive. This comes in the wake of a report into its handling of the long-term care system at the start of the pandemic in 2020. Ombudswoman Mary Rinfret concluded that the system's vulnerable residents were largely an afterthought in the CAQ government's pandemic preparedness plans. Some 4,000 residents died between February and June 2020. This makes up nearly 70% of Quebec's COVID deaths in the first wave. Alberta and British Columbia are pushing back against the federal government's new $4.5 billion transfer payment targeted for mental health. BC Health Minister Adrian Dix says more money for mental health is a priority, but a dedicated transfer wouldn't work. He says this is because it's nearly impossible to separate mental health treatment and services from other health care. The spokesperson for Alberta Health Minister Jason Copping says the federal government would be most effective if it was a funding partner and promoted shared goals. This is rather than prescribing specific solutions with conditional funding or earmarked transfers. The C.D. Howe Institute has released a report that recommends the Bank of Canada issue a digital currency linked to the dollar that can be converted into cash. The think tank says stable coins could become attractive if they are convertible into cash and are well designed and well regulated. A stable coin is a cryptocurrency that is linked to an underlying asset, such as government-issued currency. The Canadian Football League expects 95% of its players to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 by the first of the month. This is something it attributes to diligence and hard work. The regular season wrapped up last Sunday with division semifinal games on tap for this Sunday. We'll be back after the break with interviews and more news making headlines around the world. But first, an interview with Mr. Thomas Caldwell of Caldwell Securities Limited. We'll be right back. This holiday season is shaping up to be a lot more merrier for retailers, according to several retail surveys. Accenture Canada's 2021 Holiday Shopping Survey suggests Canadians will spend an average of $635. This is up more than 23% from last year. Deloitte Canada's 2021 Holiday Retail Outlook puts that even higher at $1,841. That is up 31% from last year. But Canadians don't only spend, they also invest. And many Canadians use investment firms to do so for a variety of reasons. One of these firms is Caldwell Securities Limited, which is marking the anniversary of its founding 40 years ago. With us to talk about the firm, the industry, and investors is Mr. Thomas Caldwell, chairman of Caldwell Securities Limited. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thank you very much, Nima.
Now, you founded Caldwell Securities Limited 40 years ago, sir. So what was the foundation you used to create your firm?
Well, at that time, banks had come into the picture. A lot of the firms I felt were trying to serve too many masters. People needing money, underwriting corporate finance accounts were the preferred clients, individuals, institutions. What I wanted to do is focus on individual clients, that is the investor. And I think that really, and remove any other conflicts. We don't do position trading. We don't do liability trading, that is. We don't do corporate finance. We dissuade people from having margin accounts. We don't believe that people should borrow money to buy securities. So it was, the premise was what I thought worked in the business. I'd been in the business for some years prior to starting the firm. I worked with some very good, excellent large firms, but it was time to try this focus on the investor.
And considering that investing plays a very important role in our lives, especially for our future lifestyle goals, purchases, and retirement, who would you say is your target client?
Typically, well, one of our partners many years ago, somebody said, do you have a minimum size of client? And he said, no, we just want to deal with nice people. And that still holds. Our clients are individuals. We do have some corporate and institutional clients, some large ones, but our focus is that professional who's maybe thinking of retiring, that entrepreneur who's sold his business, typically high net worth individuals, but they don't have to be high net worth individuals. As my partner said, you just have to be nice people.
And we're also seeing these investment apps pop up now. So why should someone invest with a Caldwell Securities Limited in particular rather than an investment app?
Well, it just depends if you want to make money or not. The simple thing is, the key ingredient in doing well financially is controlling your emotions. I've seen more money lost because of emotional thinking, emotional trading. Oh, this market's terrible, get me out kind of thing. I don't think there was one app who suggested you buy the stock market right during the low of COVID a year ago, March. We did. So our job is to help people control their emotions. And for me, I manage a lot of money and I'm subject to emotions as well. So for me, talking to someone else helps me control my emotions. Even if I may not listen to them, I hear myself articulating a point of view. So I think the consultative process is terribly important. If you have a decision to make, it's good to discuss it with somebody, a pro, and someone who's for you. And I think that's really what we've premised our firm on. And it's done well because we not only provide that investment advice, we go beyond that into other areas.
And you mentioned that you've been in the industry for over 40 years now. So what would you say has changed the most since you began working in the financial industry?
I've been in the business over 55 years and the firm a little bit over 40 years. What has changed the most is the incredible burden of regulation. That has become almost an entity that can't stop itself from continually making more and more regulations, driving costs up, taking time away from the advisor from talking to clients, to filling in paperwork, et cetera. There's no industry that's done this to itself as the investment industry has done, whether it be medicine, accounting, architecture, engineering, anything. It's a business that's in great measure been hampered, strangled by, it's not that I'm against regulation, but they should be intelligent regulations, that it should be relevant. It should be there to protect investors and give clarity, but it just doesn't end. They just can't stop.
All right, sir, just about 10 seconds left here, but has anything stayed the same in the industry?
Yes, the vast majority, and I've known many people in many firms over many years, the vast majority of advisors in this industry really care about their clients and want to do the right thing by them. Yeah, you're going to have people that push things too much and put themselves first, but the vast majority of people want to do the right thing by their clients. They don't need to have somebody beating them over the head, filling in forms to make sure they've done the right thing.
All right, sir, thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Today marks the UN's International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and advocates are speaking out across the world to push for an end to this issue. Last week, tens of thousands of protesters marched through Paris and other French cities to demand more government action to prevent violence against women. Here in Canada, the situation has only gotten worse due to the pandemic. In 2020 alone, 160 females were violently murdered, according to a report by the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability at the University of Guelph. That's equal to one woman or girl killed every 2.4 days in Canada. And the number is an increase from 2019, when 146 women and girls were killed, according to the Call It Femicide report. Well, joining us now to give us a better understanding of the situation in Canada currently is Miss Eyre Whitmore, the Executive Director of the Ending Violence Association of Canada. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we mentioned some stats from 2020, but what are the latest figures when it comes to violence against women in Canada?
Well, gender-based violence continues to be a significant problem in Canada. Worldwide, we know that 1 in 3 women and girls will experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. And those numbers are reflective of the situation in Canada. You're right that since the start of the pandemic, we have seen an increase in the rates of violence against women, including femicide, as you've just mentioned. And as I understand from the work that's being done at the Canadian Femicide Observatory, in the first 6 months of 2021, 92 women have been killed in Canada. And those numbers are an increase from the same time period in 2019 and 2020. We've also seen increases in domestic violence and sexual violence. And so it's really important when we're talking about these statistics to really think about what are the social conditions that are creating this increase in violence. And certainly the pandemic and the inequalities that the pandemic has created and exposed is something we really need to look at.
Some very saddening numbers there, ma'am. Now, violence can come in many forms. There's physical abuse, psychological abuse, and sometimes it's hard for someone to recognize that they're being abused by a loved one. So how can someone recognize these patterns of abusive behavior?
Yeah, you're right that there is many different forms of violence. And if someone is feeling unsafe, if they're feeling like they're maybe being manipulated or controlled, if they feel like they're being forced to do something that they don't want to do, all of these can be signs that there may be violence or abuse taking place. It sometimes can be easier to recognize violence when it's physical or sexual. These are often the types of violence that we hear a lot more about. But certainly there is violence that can be psychological, economic. We can see stalking, harassment, and other forms of controlling behavior. So I would encourage anyone, if you are feeling uncertain about something that's maybe happening in a relationship or a situation that you're in, if you're feeling unsafe, to reach out to a supportive person in your life and have a conversation about that.
And speaking about support systems, what is the current state of support for victims of abuse in Canada?
Sure. So there are a number of different types of supports available. There are domestic violence shelters and transition houses. There are community-based sexual assault centers for those who have experienced sexual violence. There's often resources in community-based health centers and hospitals. There's lots of interesting and supportive peer support and survivor-led initiatives that are also happening. So there are a number of supports out there, but we also know that many of these organizations and networks that provide these services are continuously struggling to ensure that they have the resources necessary to meet that demand. And that also, depending on where you live in Canada, you may face additional challenges in seeking that support. And I'm thinking particularly of those living in northern and rural and remote communities across the country. So while there are really wonderful services that are staffed by a very resilient and creative network of people who want to support survivors, there's always ongoing work to do to ensure that there is equitable access for everyone who needs that type of support.
All right, Ms. Whitmore, thank you again for joining us today and sharing this important message with us.
Great, thanks for having me.
Stay tuned. Up next, we take a look at stories making news around the world. A deadly tragedy in the English Channel, riots in the Solomon Islands, and Interpol elects a controversial new president. These stories and more when we return on the Forum Daily, so stay tuned. We'll be back after a short break. The deaths of at least 27 people in the English Channel is fueling tensions between the UK and France. It is over how to stop migrants from crossing the world's busiest waterway in small boats. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and French President Emmanuel Macron have pledged to do everything possible to stop people smugglers from endangering lives. But politicians on both sides of the Channel are already sniping at their counterparts for failing to prevent Wednesday's tragedy. Australia says it is sending police, troops, and diplomats to the Solomon Islands under the terms of a bilateral security agreement. This is to help after anti-government demonstrators defied lockdown orders and took to the streets for a second day in violent protests. Solomon Islands Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare declared the lockdown on Wednesday. This was after 1,000 people gathered in protest in the capital, demanding his resignation over various domestic issues. The government says the protesters breached the National Parliament building and set fire to other buildings, including a police station. The international law enforcement body known as Interpol on Thursday elected a contentious official from the United Arab Emirates as its new president. Major General Ahmed Nasir El-Raisi, Inspector General at the UAE's Interior Ministry, was elected for a 4-year term today at Interpol's annual General Assembly in Istanbul. He has been accused by human rights groups of involvement in torture and arbitrary detentions. Germany has become the latest country to surpass 100,000 deaths from COVID-19 since the pandemic began in March 2020. Germany's disease control agency said today it recorded 351 additional virus-related deaths over the past 24 hours. That took the total toll to 100,119. Germany is the 5th country to pass that mark in Europe after Russia, the United Kingdom, Italy, and France. The European Union's drug regulator has authorized Pfizer's coronavirus vaccine for use on children ages 5 to 11. Thursday's decision clears the way for shots to be administered to millions of elementary school children on the continent. This comes amid a new wave of infections sweeping across Europe. Starting in December, Poland will cut taxes on fuel and energy. This while offering bonuses next year to counter inflation that has reached its highest level since 2001. On Thursday, Premier Mateusz Morawiecki said the so-called anti-inflation shield will cost the government some 10 billion zlotys, or $2.4 billion. He blamed the 6.8% inflation on Russia's gas policy, EU climate policy, and on bonuses that were paid out to help businesses survive the pandemic. Russian media reports say at least 52 people have died after a fire at a coal mine in Siberia. Rescuers found 14 bodies, but were forced to halt the search for 38 others due to a buildup of carbon monoxide fumes. Media reports say emergency officials believe there is no chance of finding other survivors. Thousands of Sudanese took to the streets in the capital of Khartoum to renew their demand for a civilian government. Thursday's rallies came just days after the military signed a power-sharing deal with the prime minister. It saw him released from house arrest and reinstated as the head of the government. The deal came almost a month after the generals orchestrated a coup that saw the premier deposed and dozens of politicians and activists detained. Sudan's key pro-democracy groups and political parties have dismissed the deal as falling short of their demands for a fully civilian rule. A large explosion outside a school in Somalia's capital Thursday morning killed at least 8 people, including students, and wounded 17. The extremist group Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack in Mogadishu. The Philippines' defense chief has rejected China's renewed demand that it remove its outpost on the disputed South China Sea. Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana said Thursday the Chinese Coast Guard ships should leave the area and stop blocking Manila's supply boats toward the second Thomas Shoal. The defense chief added that a 2016 ruling by a UN-backed arbitration tribunal also invalidated China's claims. China has repeatedly asked the Philippines to evacuate the shoal that it claims in one of the world's busiest waterways. Manhattan's annual Macys Thanksgiving Day Parade was back after being kept away last year. The Thanksgiving Parade is the latest U.S. holiday event to make a comeback. This comes as vaccines, familiarity, and sheer frustration make some officials more comfortable with big gatherings. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.